Hey, Keith, what's going on, man? Welcome to the Booked on Rock podcast. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you, Eric. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, looking forward to this one. It's funny because we just both happen to live in Connecticut. It's not like we didn't bump into each other and say, "Hey, oh, you got a podcast? I'll get you. You come on mine, I'll come on yours." It was just like we just listened to each other's podcasts and found out that we're from Connecticut and not too far, and we know a lot of people, like a lot of
Yeah,
people in the radio business, etc. So yeah, tell us about yourself and your podcast, Abandoned Albums. You're also a writer.
I
Are
am.
you born and raised in Connecticut?
I'm not. I'm born and raised in the Midwest. I was born in Minnesota. Minnesota. I even got it correctly.
Wow.
Minnesota.
Well,
And
my brother's a Vikes fan,
how was he?
long time Vikes fan. Yep.
And then my coming of age years, I like to say, were in Ohio. I was there from like 13 to 19.
What part of
So
Ohio?
Dayton, Ohio.
Okay.
Yep. And then I left for the East Coast, and I've been on the East Coast far longer than I ever lived in the Midwest.
Now, tell me about Minnesota winters. Are they as brutal as they say?
They weren't as brutal. I mean, they're. I recall the summers being much worse. We joked that the state bird in Minnesota is the mosquito.
Yeah.
You know, it's so humid. But the winter that I remember the most was the one we spent in Canada.
All
My
right.
birthday is in June, and it's the only time in my entire life where I've been in school on my birthday because they bake in snow days into the school year. And
Like ahead
sure
of
enough,
time. Like ahead
ahead
of
of time.
time.
Yep. They bake in till you go to like the third week of June. Or when I was there, we went to the third week of June. And sure enough, we had at least 1 to 2 snow days a week through the peak of the snow season. Yeah.
Well, I'm a June birthday guy too. This is
All right, when's
crazy.
your birthday?
June 2nd.
I'm June 11th.
Wow.
Wow.
This
Gemini
is
high five.
Gemini high five, man. This is eerie. This is eerie.
Yeah.
Let's see what else we have in common. What turned you on to rock and roll music?
Uh, what turns me on to rock and roll? I really don't know. I remember one of the first albums I ever got was Elton John's Greatest Hits Volume 1, and I think I was just blown away by him, and I remember just loving Crocodile Rock. I don't remember any one particular moment or song. My mother used to say that I had to, I always went to sleep with music on since I was a baby, and that's something I continued to do well into my 20s.
That greatest hits is the
So
blue one. I think he's got the funky
it is.
glasses
I
on.
should show you the cover. I've written all over. My little 8-year-old self has written over. It's like, I love you. Yeah, you're my favorite artist.
Yeah, that's like the must have, especially in college. You had to have like this one, Marley's greatest hits, Steve
Yeah.
Miller's greatest hits,
Yes.
The Doors greatest hits.
You
Yeah, that's
didn't need to
cool.
celebrate any of those bands' catalog as far as I was concerned. You were pretty much good with the greatest hits, except Elton John.
Yeah,
His album work was certainly worth it.
yeah. Elton's the man. I
But I
didn't.
don't
We
know what
we
turned me
kind
on
of
to rock.
glazed over the abandoned albums thing. Like,
Well,
when did
yeah,
that all start?
that's the podcast I have. I like to say that it's the only music podcast that matters. Of course, I don't mean that. Um, I'll say it here for anyone that cares. It's a ripoff from the Clash. The Clash were marketed as the only band that matters. So that's all that is. A little tip of the hat to the Clash. And Abandoned Albums is what we do is we take an album from history that's been overlooked, ignored. Um, just moments ago, I dropped the first episode after 101, 102 episodes. That is a true abandoned albums. The conceit of the show was I wanted to find those records, those albums that had been recorded but got shelved for whatever reason, that never saw the light of day. Didn't work out that way. That was a far more challenging task than I had imagined. But this one I just released was a band called Shuffle Puck, and they released a record for Interscope Records at the peak of Interscope's power, and it got shelved not because it was a bad record, and it is not a bad record. It's a very good record. Um, it got shelved because there were other bands on Interscope that kept releasing stuff, so they kept getting pushed back because they were a new band, a baby
Well,
band. They kept
you,
getting bumped.
You know, I'm familiar with that name, right? Because S.W. Loudon was on the show.
Oh, I
So
didn't know
he's
he was
got,
on.
yes, I thought you knew that. Sorry. Yeah, he was on to
I knew he
promote.
was going to be on, but
Yes. Yes, it just ran, and he was on to promote the book and the vinyl LP together, which is a great idea, which
correct.
celebrates that whole geek rock era
Yeah,
of the 90s and 2000s. And yeah, you guys got to check this out who are listening right now that are interested in that generation. Generation Blue, that's the name
yeah,
of the book and the album, Generation Blue. But yeah, he mentioned Shuffle Puck, and I think that was one too. You're saying the A&R guy just kind of disappeared, like, he was
yeah,
supposed to really get behind it. And the album's great, and it's one of those albums that happens a lot more often than
yeah.
I ever thought.
And
There's a
those are
lot
the
of,
ones
like, everything has to line up just right for these bands.
correct. And then my default was to go to Broken Homes, which is my default album for virtually everything because I love that record. But so along the way, that was the original idea. Along the way, it's just sort of changed, and now it's really a straight up music podcast um, with artists of any any level, really. New artists, I get pitched by PR people all the time, and
Isn't that
if I like
cool?
the music, yeah,
Isn't that cool?
it's
Yeah.
cool, and
You're important.
I don't know about that. I'll take it though. Thank you.
Yeah,
Uh,
man. What I love is, and you just had Greg Prato on, one of
yeah,
my
I
favorite
did.
authors ever, and he's really a friend of the show now at this point. He's been on so many times. And I was listening to that interview, and one of the things, I mean, you're genuinely interested. So that comes across.
It does. Oh, thank you.
You're also asking questions based on the answers. You're listening. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And that's not so
thanks.
easy. It's not
It
that easy.
No, it blows my outline out of the water because I do actually prepare and have an outline, but I like to go with the flow, and I don't, something. I want it to be a natural conversation. I don't want an interview, a rigid interview.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of albums, first album you ever bought, and also what was the first concert you ever went to? But first, start with the album. First
Sure.
album.
First album.
Did you buy the greatest hits by Elton John, or was that
I don't know how I procured that, to be honest with you.
so? Then first
I
album you
honestly
can
don't know.
remember buying.
The first album I remember buying were two: Fleetwood Mac Rumors and Steve Miller Book of Dreams.
Not bad.
Yeah,
Synchronicity, Police. I've said that story
yeah.
many times.
That was uh that was at the Target, the Target, as my mother used to call it. This is before Target was what it
Tarjay.
is today. It was actually not
Yeah.
quite so nice.
First
The first
concert.
concert. Now, I used to tell people it was the Black Sabbath and Blue Oyster Cult tour of 1980, the Black and Blue tour, 1980. And that's a lie because my first concert was really John Denver the year before at the St. Paul Civic Center.
That's not too shabby. The late great John Denver.
Yep. Yeah. I can now hang my head, not hang my head, hold my head high.
Yes,
I'm proud of that. But I
he
wasn't when I
was
was 18.
no, but he was a massive star in 1979.
It was.
He had the movie,
Oh, God.
Oh God,
Yeah.
hit singles.
Yeah. He
Yeah.
was a monster star. And yeah, it was a great show.
Now here's a tough one. I'm trying myself to remember the very first podcast I ever listened to. Do you remember yours?
I do.
Okay, which one?
It was Radio Lab. It was a Radio Lab episode. And it was an episode about, I forget what the topic was, but I remember the story. I'll paraphrase poorly and briefly. The story was about a woman in New York City who had been hit by a car and had been in what everyone thought was, well, she was in a coma, but sorry, my dog. She was in
That's
a
your
coma.
dog's wagging his tail,
No,
right?
he's
Oh,
scratching.
tell him we said hello. He's down there
Yeah,
somewhere.
okay, buddy. Bad news about well, that's a whole other thing. But she was. Have you heard of the phrase? I think it's called trapped in, locked in. I think they call it. You
You
know the
know?
Metallica video where the guy is in the first video they had where the guy
Oh, for
is,
one?
yeah,
Oh yeah.
the character, that male character, that's what's called locked in, when somebody they assume they're dead, but they're not
Right.
really dead. Their brain is still functioning. And that's what happened to this young woman who was hit by a car, and she was on life support, but her brain was still active. She just couldn't communicate. And so they had made the decision to pull the plug, and she was writing. I get goosebumps now even thinking. She wrote on her boyfriend's hand. She's like, "I'm here," as best she could, and eventually she came out of it. They didn't pull the plug, and eventually she came out of it. She lost her sight, and I think she lost some of her hearing, but she lived. That was the first podcast I remember hearing, listening to.
That's WNYC in New York
Yep. They
produces
do great
those.
work. And
Oh,
what blew me
yeah.
away about that is they do interesting work with audio. They texture the audio
Yeah.
in such a way that makes it's it's wonderful. They do
It's
great work.
yeah, the production. Whoever's doing production there,
Yeah.
hats off to them. I'm trying to remember. I know early podcasts that I listened to. I mean, it might have been. I'm just thinking of one off the top of my head is Astonishing Legends. Do you know that one?
No, I don't.
Okay, Astonishing Legends is it's like a paranormal focused
Uh,
podcast, but so professionally done. Two hosts and just everything from the logo to the website, just the way it's put together, and it's just I was like, wow, this I want to do. Then I'm trying to think of some maybe the first music podcast that I ever listened to, and that's crazy how I don't know.
that
I became more. I loved actually just the homegrown ones, like just you just it didn't have to be super polished. It was just like to be honest with you, I'm a horror movie fan, so like I listened to
yeah.
podcasts on the Halloween franchise or Friday the 13th or like there was one that was just on scary movies, like whatever's new that's out now, and talk about some of the old ones. And I just thought it was just so cool because it's not something.
Is there a podcast for the movie Leprechaun?
I bet you there is.
There's
I
a
bet you
podcast
there
for
is.
everything.
Remember the way he was in the hood? Is that part three?
Yeah. Ridiculous.
But yeah, well, what was the first podcast that inspired you to make your own? Is it Radiolab? Like, what made you think I want to do this?
Um, what what made me want to? I think the fact that I could. The first one I remember doing, they weren't called podcasts at the time. They were called like audio diary, well, audio blogging. What I would do, the first one that I did about a dozen of these. Is the radio host Delilah?
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah. Well,
syndicated show.
yeah,
This goes out to playing
exactly.
all yeah, Light
Well, what I would do is
100.5 in our
I'd write in
area.
these fictional letters, like, oh my, we're pregnant with our first baby, and then I would play the most ridiculous song like you could imagine. So, say somebody wrote and said, "Oh, we're pregnant with our first baby," blah blah blah, and then I played the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Just like so absurd, like the anti Delilah. You know, that's the first one I remember doing, and then I think I told you I did one with a friend of mine, Cocktails.
Did you have trouble setting stuff up? Because I'm not an engineer, so that was for me tricky. Like,
Drinking?
no, setting up like the mixer and the technical aspect of stuff, like getting everything to where you can actually talk into a microphone and it
I don't
works.
have a mixer. I shouldn't say that. I
Oh,
just
okay, all right.
mic. Yeah, I use the mic. That's
So
it.
yeah, okay. So the technical aspect of it wasn't
No.
big. See, I don't know why I was like shooting for the stars. Like I'm like an audiophile, so everything had to be just so.
Before I started abandoning albums, I'm like, all right, I want to do this right. I don't want to do this, And I
Well, because it
remember
does sound like, but you're using a microphone that's like a I mean, I don't know,
it's a
it's a
Shure.
professional mic or,
Yeah, it's a Shure mic.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you're not, and some people don't even use a microphone at all, and it's just them in the room. That's cool too. It doesn't matter.
Eh,
I mean, it depends. It could be really, really bad, but I mean, I mean, look, I listen to one of my favorite podcasts would be This may be the first music podcast now that I think about it. Three Sides of the Coin, the Kiss podcast. I love it.
Oh wow, okay.
And, you know, the hosts, they don't have a professional mic or anything like that. They're just, you know, they Zoom, and that's
What does that mean? Three sides.
well,
That
it's a
must have
play
been
off the Ace Frehley song
okay.
Two Sides of the Coin from the Unmasked album in 1980. And there are three hosts, so three sides of the coin. And
Oh.
technically, there are three sides to a coin because you have that little.
The side, I suppose.
I'm getting this semantics, or I'm not sure, but yeah, that's
Okay.
three sides of the coin. But so yeah, that wasn't a tough goal for me. I was just an audiophile to the point where I literally in the beginning, I was hooking everything up through my phone, doing Zoom through there, so I can have the cleanest sound possible, without right. And then so the audio was coming in for the guest through Zoom, but it was coming in clean straight through the mixer for me. And I thought that sounds perfect. But after a while, I was like, it doesn't really matter. Like Zoom, the Zoom audio is good enough. I mean, it gets to the point like sometimes you know, I just become so obsessed with it. I'm like, all right, just relax.
Until we can get into a studio and do it the way, you know.
Yeah.
I think the key to it is just having a good mic. I mean, I spent a fair chunk of change on the microphone.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, and there are two kinds of mics. There's a dynamic mic, and then there's the condenser mic, which is like there's a difference in the condenser mics pick up more of the room sound.
Right.
So the dynamic mic is what radio stations use.
Which
Yeah.
I think this is dynamic because it doesn't.
Is it?
It just
Yeah.
picks up what's in front of it.
Yeah. Now what mix and match is that like a side?
Yeah, that's the other
Side.
podcast I do.
It's
The
part of
goal
abandoned albums, though, isn't
it
it? Under
is.
the
It
umbrella,
is.
kind of.
It is. It's the goal of that is just to get folks talking. The goal of that is to get music nerds together, you know, and have them pick out 10 songs. You don't need to be a musician. You don't need to be involved in the industry. You don't
I
need
was
to,
on.
yeah, you know, you don't need to do any of that stuff. You know, I interviewed an old colleague of mine the other day because he's a big music nerd. So it's just a chance and an opportunity. It's another avenue for me to express myself creatively and to get all of us talking to build a community among the music podcasters. I think that's equally as important.
And just people just enjoy a podcast with two people having their conversation. It's just something about it. There's something.
I like to think so.
Yeah. You're a writer too.
I am. I do write. I write the occasional. I usually try to write an accompanying piece on our Substack, the Abandoned Album Substack.
Really well written, man. Got to tell
Oh,
you.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if that means anything, but from one writer to another, it's really good.
Of course, it means.
And I envy your.
Everything.
I try to keep up with a blog on my website, but it's just hard to do. And you got it right. Yeah.
It's very hard to do, but yeah, I do write. I've written plays. I've written screenplays. A lot of plays I had produced when I lived in New York, but nothing that anyone would have seen. We're talking way off Broadway, black box theater type stuff. Screenplays. I've never written a novel. Some short stories. I write these things called 100 words, where I try to convey a message or a story or an idea in 100 words or less. Well, actually, exactly 100 words. That's the exercise.
Okay.
And that's kind of fun.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you've had some great guests on. A couple of friends of mine, Darren Paltritz, who wrote a great book on David Lee Roth, the DLR book. And then I mentioned Greg Prado, who just wrote a book on Rat. It's one of many books he's written. I think he's up to like 40 or even more. Rat. It's called World Infestation, the Rat Story. So go out and get those books. You also had members of the band The Call on. Dude,
I did.
That's awesome. The Call.
That was a good get.
Yeah, what a great band. How did you get? Sadly, the singer's no longer with us, but the remaining members of the band put something together from old recordings.
They found a bunch of old recordings with his vocals on it, and the vocals were good. They were just songs that didn't make it to whatever album they were recording at the time. And they were one of the bands that I've always wanted to have on. And I tried about 16, 18 months ago, and I came close, I got in touch with somebody who was in touch with them, and he goes, well, let me ask them if they'd be interested. And then I followed up a couple weeks later, and he's like, oh, I haven't heard back yet. Let me double check. And then I just never followed up. I figured if they wanted to do it. So then when I found out they were releasing this box set and this new album and the remastered Reconciled and Into the Woods, I was like, all right, well, now they have something to promote. Now they might want to come on there. And sure enough, all three agreed, but unfortunately the drummer couldn't make it. But I got 50% of the band. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Michael Bean, the singer,
Couldn't
passed
make it.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael Bean, 60 years old and passed in 2010, but really cool voice, great lyrics. I'm assuming he wrote the lyrics.
He did. The
Phenomenal
lion's share of
lyricist.
them, yeah. You know, it's interesting. You know what his son does?
No.
It's a neat story. His son is in a band called Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. And they're not terribly big here in the States, but they're very popular in Europe. And when the last record by The Call kind of fizzled out, and it was Let the Day Begin, that would have been 2000. He sort of put the band on ice and went and started working with his son, doing sound for his son. And that's how he passed away. He had a heart attack while doing sound for his son.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Let the Day Begin is a great song.
Oh.
There are people that are probably listening to us talk about this band, and they've heard the songs, but may not even realize that the band is The Call. Let the Day Begin. Let's see, single. The Walls Came Down.
Yep. Brilliant.
Let the Day Begin. I think those are the two big ones, but I Still Believe.
Yep. Peter Gabriel once referred to them as the future of American music.
Yes, that's on their website. I think they have that on there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they should have been. Yeah,
there are those bands that you just think, man, they should have been bigger than they were. But then again, I mentioned this recently on an episode. It's like you could look at the glass half full and say, hey, they made it. I mean, they got there. MCA Records signed them, and they got a couple singles on the radio. So how many people can say they
and that was a time when getting a deal with a label was no small task. I mean, today I don't think it's different. It's a whole different game today, but back then it was a lot of work. You had to be really, really good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Which is not to take anything away from bands that are on labels now, I think. But it was different game.
Who is it just saying they don't think labels will even be around anymore in 10 years?
I don't think they should be. I think they should be nothing more than marketing departments. That's all they're good for.
Yeah. Any favorite and their money, yeah. Any favorite interviews?
Favorite interviews. Jimmy Ashurst is always a great interview. He's a bass player.
Yeah.
Any favorite interviews?
Because my feeling is that I always look at, when I think of favorite interviews, I'm not thinking about who the guest is, big name, not a big name. It's interesting. Like,
I just interviewed a guy, a rap artist by the name of X-Rated. That's not his Christian name, I don't think.
It's not his birth name.
But in any event, he spent 26 years in prison, and for a crime. He was convicted of a crime. He was probably one of the nicest men that I've interviewed. He came out. He really used it to educate himself. I think the chance of recidivism with him is next to nil. But we just had a great conversation, and while he was in prison, he continued to release records. He went in when he was 17 years old and spent 26 years in prison. And while he was in prison, he kept releasing records. He would record like through a phone, a cell phone, and it would get sent out, recorded, and someone would lay down beats outside, and he kept continuing to release music, which I thought was really interesting. And he himself is just just a really, really nice guy, really cool guy. His message isn't what it was when he was 20. You know, it's different because you're different at a 40 something.
It's a
But
great story. I'm looking
yeah, I
here.
really enjoyed
X-rated
that.
RAIDED
Correct.
from
Correct.
Sacramento, born in
And he
74.
paid me a very nice compliment. He said, "Man, I like the way you interview." Because I don't know if you ever get that insecure feeling. I get
Sure.
terribly insecure. It's like, oh,
All the time.
doing this? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Idiot.
It never goes away.
No. So that was really. I was like, wow, all right, okay, cool, cool.
Yeah.
So that was one that stands out.
To me, I always feel like it's not until maybe 5 minutes in, I start to feel like I'm warmed up and it gets better. It's always in the beginning. I'm like stiff, I feel.
Well, let me ask you, how do you handle getting a cranky
Oh, I
interview?
was just about to ask you, like, have you had any good interview stories? Because I've only had one. I had one
Um,
guy get pissed at me.
no, I've never had anyone get angry at me. I've had some tense moments, and I can tell at times I'll have a co-host, whether it's Jeff Calhoun, and early on it was Rob Janicki. At time, you can tell when somebody is vibing more with somebody else. I'll stand back and do more listening than engaging, and it just because it's clear they have a connection for whatever reason with the other person. But I've never had anything tense or anything that I considered to be tense. I've had moments, but I usually try to deflect it and make it funny.
Yeah,
I
because
don't
they're
know.
always these are generally a fun experience. So I've had every single interview has been great, where everybody had a great time, everybody was cool. Um, I I I had this one author, I won't say the name, but I I read the book and I set up the questions, and I could tell like he seemed to be getting irritated with the questions. And then at one point I asked another question. He goes, "I thought we were talking about the book." And I was like, "Okay, like deer in the headlights. Never happened to me before."
Wow.
And I just like, "Okay, man, good talking to you." And he's like, "Is that it?" Yeah. "Oh,
Good for you.
you don't want to ask anything else?" Uh, sure. What do you think? What do you see in the future for the band? And it was like he gave a quick answer. I'm like, "All right, man, take care."
Good for you.
And there was an email that came through to my website, and he was like, "Yeah, that kind of ended awkward." I'm thinking, myself, you think, you got pissed at me, and he just was like, "I just don't feel the questions were really about the book. They were more biographical about the band, and they really weren't what. That's not, what I was. That's not the way I approached the book." And I was like, "Okay." I said, "Listen, I want guests to have a good time, when
Yeah.
you're on. So it's all good with me. I just wasn't going to keep you on any longer than than you wanted."
Right. Right.
And so and I edited it all out and I put the episode up, because what kind of was like, in my defense, I'm like, well, we are talking about the book, and I put the picture of the book cover on the episode art, and I put a link to the book. Half the reason I do this podcast is to help authors sell the book. So
Right.
yeah, I'm talking about the book.
Right.
And then it was one point where, like, I was reading an excerpt from the book, and it was funny. He was like, I don't really agree with that. I was like, you don't agree with what you wrote?
You wrote it.
I'm like, okay. So weird, man. Weird. It
If
was
you ever get a chance, do yourself a favor and listen to the Mark Maron episode where he interviews Gallagher.
yeah,
Oh yeah.
awkward.
Oh yeah. So Gallagher gets up and walks out. It's the shortest WTF episode I think that he has.
See, I was wondering if I should have run all that part, but I just, it's not what this podcast is about. It's not. I'm not looking for shock value. I'm looking to. I genuinely have a respect and admiration for writers. So I'm here to get great stories from the guests, but also I want people to know about your book that may not have known about it, and I want to help you.
I, I'm I'm less altruistic. I think I'm like even this Shuffle Puck episode. I referred to them by the wrong name.
Right. Right.
And the lead singer's like, you might want to do that again. You said the name wrong. I'm like, oh, what'd I say? He said, you said Shuttlepuck. And I'm like, God
Oh,
damn it.
yeah. Yeah.
I was like, I'm sorry.
Well,
But I left that in
yeah.
because it shows if somebody got really pissed at me, and it would a case by case situation, I think.
Yeah.
You know?
That I just felt like
I
that I
would
just
love to have heard that.
yeah, that I just felt like I would have been I would have been being a dick, you know, like
Vengeance.
yeah, and it's just not that wasn't my intent, you know. I remember I had COVID at the time too, so I was pretty weak. I probably shouldn't have I should have maybe delayed it. You know, maybe yeah, you know, maybe I just wasn't on my game. Weird. Weird.
Yeah.
Never happened before or since. Yeah.
Good. Good.
Unless you're gonna get pissed at me.
No.
I thought we were here to talk about my podcast. So let's do that. Keith R. Higgins is our guest. Yeah, the host of the Abandoned Albums podcast. Let's talk rock and roll books. You sent over a great list. Books on rock you've read some of, or want to talk about.
Right.
Okay, so Joel Selvin's book on Jim Gordon was first on the list. It's brand new. It's called Drums and Demons, and The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon. That's the complete title. Drums and Demons: The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon. I just recorded the episode with Joel, and I cannot wait to put it up. Oh my God, he was awesome.
Yeah, he's
what a story.
I've read a couple of his books, and he's
cool, man. He's like the real deal, like the cigar, and he's smoking the cigar, and
he's like old school.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, boy, he should have a podcast, and sure enough, he does. I mean, he's got a voice. So it was just like this fascinating interview. I mean, sad, tragic story, of course, but it's the full story of Jim Gordon, who was on Derek and Domino's Layla, and he's on Beach Boys recordings, and he plays drums on Carly Simon's "You're So Vain."
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he even does more. Jackson Brown. He's on a Tom Petty song. Yeah, and but on the "You're So Vain" story, it was cool because it wasn't even just the drums. Like he was helping to orchestrate the song in a way that it hadn't sounded when it was brought in, and like just brilliant mind, but schizophrenic. And then the voices at first, when he was a teenager and a kid, they were helpful was the word. So you better fold your clothes, or you better make sure you wash the dishes before you go to bed, you know, like stuff like that. But then they became angry and evil, and telling him not to eat for days on end, telling him to throw away all of his gold and platinum records, and then he would go out into the trash and take them out of the trash, put them back on the wall, and then they would tell him, no, you got to take them back. And then it got to the point where he was hearing his mother's voice, and then the only way that the voices were telling him the only way to stop it is to kill your mother, and he killed his mother in June of '83.
I think it's really important to note that schizophrenics are not violent. The very tiny majority of them are violent. He
mentioned that. Joel mentioned that.
Yeah, he happened to be one that was violent.
Look at Brian Wilson. He worked with and knew Brian Wilson, also schizophrenic, but Brian Wilson wasn't violent. It's a terrible story.
I remember reading that story in Rolling Stone, and like when it first broke, and I'm like, my God. First of all, I couldn't wrap my head around what it takes the method in which he murdered his mother is horrific. The act itself is horrific enough. But
he had a hammer and then finished her off with a knife.
Yeah.
And then he went to a bar and had some drinks. And one of the guys in the bar was, I think, interviewed for the book, Joel said, and the guy's like, he noticed he had like a lot of, looked like dirt on his sleeves or something. It might have been blood. I mean,
it had to be, right?
And then the creepiness of, at one point during the day, he had knocked on the mother's door and she wasn't home, and some guy, the neighbor, was out just watering his grass and noticed somebody knocking on the door, looking in, and then just leaving, getting his truck, and he came back. But and then the sad thing was, in his trial, only one person showed up. It was, I'm trying to remember it was Jay Osmond, one of the, I can't remember. It was one of the projects.
Tour manager?
I can't remember. But episode's going up later. Well, it'll be up.
You got to check that out, folks.
Clapton pretended like he never knew him. Nobody, you know, that's the reason, like, Joel wanted to write this book, is to at least put some kind of understanding of the mental illness, and kind of we got to hear the whole
And
story.
I've written about Jim Gordon myself a couple of different times
Did you?
because, yeah, because he's being whitewashed from musical history, and I don't think that's entirely fair, because I don't know how we can celebrate. I'm not going to name names, but I don't know how we can celebrate certain musicians um, who were, quite frankly, pedophiles. You know, I mean, if you're dating a 13-year-old girl and you're 29, 30 years old, I don't know, man. I don't know. That's a little weird in my book. We celebrate these guys. Michael Jackson's another one. We celebrate these guys, but here's a guy who was legitimately ill,
Right.
and his fingerprint is all over classic rock, all over it.
Yeah, he's on so many recordings. Imagine hearing voices every day.
Oh,
Then the only thing that stopped it or settled it, the voices, was when he did coke and alcohol together. Something like it did something with a dopamine. It was like something
yeah.
that, at least for a short period, helped.
It,
But then he didn't even go to his parole. He was up for parole many times. He didn't even show up. So he passed away in March of 2023 in
yes.
prison. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Tragic story all around. And
Yeah, you had Joel on your show,
I
right?
did. I had him on the show to talk about that book, because
Yeah.
I I just think Jim Gordon is an amazing artist. You know,
Yeah.
just I, I can't emphasize that enough. His fingerprint is everywhere. Steely Dan, Jackson Brown, the
Ricky, don't
Beatles,
lose that number. Yeah.
every Beatle except Paul McCartney, um, the Monkees, almost any band that you can think of between the
Joe
years,
Cocker.
yeah,
Yeah.
65, 66 through 77, 78. You
I
know,
mean,
and everyone's like, oh, I don't know who that is. It's like, yeah, you do, because
you
he
do.
wrote
Yeah.
the piano coda to Layla.
And he was so good that people, even when he was starting to cause a lot of problems because of his illness, people were still bringing him into the studio
Hmm.
because he
Yeah,
was that good. Yeah.
I love the Tom Petty story.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That was in between Mudcrutch and the first album, and
Yep,
then he doubled up the drums.
which
The
is
other
an impossible task.
yeah, the other one was a 6-inch crater that he put into the snare drum on one of the songs. I think was it You're So Vain? Like he just hit it so hard.
Oh, I don't recall that.
Yeah, yeah, man. Yeah. Tell me about this book, Lords of Chaos, by Michael Moynihan and Didrik Soderlind. This is about
Yeah,
Norwegian death metal.
yeah, it's a really. I read about half that book because there's a comedian by the name of Dave Hill who tells a story, who just began a correspondence with some guys who ran a death metal label in Switzerland and Norway. I get those countries mixed up. But he began this really just absurd correspondence with the label head. And he did an episode with, I think it was whatever Malcolm Gladwell's podcast is. Um, in any event, it's a book about Norwegian death metal. And these are people who celebrate metal to a degree that you can't even wrap your head around. They've killed themselves. There was a period where they would burn churches, like these hundreds of year old wood churches. They'd burn them to the ground. Um, One guy, I forget their names, and they'll record one album, never tour, and that's it. It it's almost Spinal Tapian in a way, but these guys are really committed to it.
It reminds me of, who's that artist? He's from the US, but he was like that, and he would just take a dump on stage. And
Gigi Allen,
yes, Gigi Allen.
yeah,
Crazy.
he's crazy, yeah.
Jeez.
And these guys are crazy too, and they and the book takes a tongue-in-cheek approach, but doesn't discount the burning of the churches, the suicides, the the violent behavior. It's not for everybody, and it clearly wasn't for me because I didn't finish it. But
What's the link you sent me to the black metal dialogues? Is that
that's the
associated with the
Dave Hill
book or
stuff. That's the comedian Dave Hill
okay?
communicating with a band member and label head. And the name of Dave Hill's band is Witch Taint. Exactly.
Witch taint. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah, I'm looking at it here. What is all this? So are these entries that he wrote? These are a
Yeah.
long time ago,
Correct.
2004. Yeah.
Yeah. They're
But
correspondence. I had Dave on the show as well to talk about that.
and what is this his writing? Is
It's him correspond. It's an actual correspondence with this guy in Norway, I guess it was, who was in this band. And Dave Hill, as the lead singer of Witch Taint, keeps calling this other guy's band that they're a bunch of pussies, that they're not metal enough, they're not dark enough. And I think he says he's from Gary, Indiana. He's not. Dave lives in Brooklyn.
okay. So like the first one here from Mr. Lou Rawls at AOL.com to
That's his email address.
that's him. Okay. To Satam.
Yeah.
The email address was removed, but anyway, yeah, so what was he emailing a band? Because he's like, hey, missed
Yeah, he's emailing
Mysticum
the lead
guys.
singer.
Yeah, I got your email off the internet. I was surprised someone in a black metal band would use email, but whatever. I guess we can't expect you guys to live in caves all the time. If you're serious about black metal, you would though. Anyway, the reason I'm writing is because I was wondering if there were two bands called Mysticum or something. The reason I asked is because my friend told me about a band called Mysticum that were really heavy and extreme, and that I should totally check them out. So I went out and bought your record, and all I got was this total pussy metal instead. Is there another band called Mysticum that I should know about? I'm really into super heavy and extreme black metal. So if there is another Mysticum that plays this kind of music, I would really like to know. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure tons of chicks dig what you guys are doing, but I'm into some serious shit, not the strummy bullshit you guys seem to be into. Anyway, let me know if you ever heard of these guys. Are you guys on MTV? Did they respond?
They did.
Oh, they
They
did.
have a dialogue.
Oh my God. Hi. First of all, I find your email a bit barefaced and strange, but I have decided to answer you anyway. You have now come to the label address to the Extreme Mysticum band. We have never heard about the pussy ones you mentioned about. Label name is Planet Satan Revolution. Check out, and they're still plugging themselves. Check out mysticum.com. Under releases link, you can download the debut album from 1995 for free. They're like promoting themselves here. Did they not get it? There you can hear. They're trying to rise above it. It looks like.
Oh,
Yeah,
they try.
living in a cave has nothing to do with black metal at all. As long as you are dealing with satanic and occult things, believe in what you are doing. You can do whatever you want. Of course, Mysticum has never been on MTV and will never be. Such music are not loved by the MTV crew, and too extreme to be on a channel that only sends crappy, happy sellout shit. Dark regards. Oh, so then it just kind of it goes back and forth and gets worse and worse. I get you.
Eventually, they reach a tipping point. They do, I think. Well, I don't want to spoil it, but they do reach a tipping point, and it's just hysterical how far it goes. And what the book does, it really does take on the dark metal world, which is pretty dark. Like I said, burning churches, suicides, self-cutting, that sort of stuff.
All right, so that's the blackmetaldialogues.com if anybody's interested.
And you should, because it's if you love music, it's one of the. I was at work and I don't know how. I think I got it from the Malcolm Gladwell interview on Broken Record. I'm like, oh, I was crying as I'm listening to Dave Hell talk about it. And then I started reading it. I just started crying even more. I'm like, this is amazing.
Yeah, because at first it's like he's trying to navigate through like, is this guy an asshole or is he? You're a big fan of The Replacements, and you say the book Trouble Boys by Bob Mayer is a must read. Here's what the promo for that book says. Based on a decade of research and reporting, as well as access to The Replacements' key principles, Paul Westerberg and Tommy Stinson, author Bob Mayer has fashioned something far more compelling than a conventional band bio. Yeah, what's tell us about this one here. What
Oh, It's
stands out
it's
about that?
it's a comprehensive book on my favorite band, and it's until one of them elects to write their own autobiography or have a biography written about them, it is about as definitive as you can get, and it's an exhaustive approach to the band. So it's not too dissimilar from that Led Zeppelin book that came out a couple of years ago. Not the one that we all know, Hammer of the Gods, but
No,
the one written by
that's
the
Spitz.
Wall Street.
What's I think I know what you're referring to.
Yeah, it came out a couple of years ago. It's definitive. It's you know,
Yeah,
um, and if you're a Replacements fan, you can't do better. And to get the band to talk is no easy task. Paul Westerberg is notoriously prickly,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Um,
I'm trying to think of that book now, the Zeppelin book. But yeah, and it says here in the promo though that the Replacements were notoriously self-destructive.
uh-huh.
What? How bad did it get?
Um, well,
Self-destructive.
well, they were their own worst enemies. In that, oh, S.W. Loudon, who was just on the show, he talked about. Back up a second. On the Abandoned Albums podcast, there are two bands that pop up the most. It's the Pixies and the Replacements. And you're almost an either or fan. You're either a Replacements fan or you're a Pixies fan, which isn't universally true, but in any event, those bands pop up more than any other bands. And I had S.W. Loudon on, and he was talking about his experience seeing them live. And it was at University of California, Santa Barbara, I think. And they came out, and something happened where Paul ended up fell off the riser and just decided to perform the show on the floor on ground level without a microphone for everybody. And everybody eats that stuff up. They're like, oh my God, this is amazing, amazing. Another story, I don't know if it's in that book. I think it's in the book, Our Band Could Be Your Life. Peter Jesperson, who was their original manager, it's like right after they got signed to Sire, they went on the road and they decided to buy themselves a Winnebago or rent a Winnebago so they could travel a little more luxurious than they have been. And they hadn't made it maybe 60, 75 miles outside of Minneapolis, and they had ripped out all the furniture inside the Winnebago. Somebody had brought spray paint, and they were spray painting the inside of the Winnebago. And at that time, Jesperson was no longer the manager. He was the tour manager. So he called the managers, and he's like, you guys just bought a Winnebago. I'm like, what are you talking about? We just rented a Winnebago. He's like, no. Proceeds to explain to them what the band just did to the Winnebago. Um, they're their own worst enemy. The one time they tried to be successful, the one time they played by the rules was oh, Don't Tell a Soul, which is many Replacements fans' least favorite record. But I like it. I like it
Too
just fine.
mainstream sounding.
It's got a real glossy sheen to the sound, which was unusual. The songs themselves are pretty good, but
Paul Westerberg's Dyslexic Heart was I
oh
always
yeah,
like that song from the Singles
mm-hmm. Yeah,
soundtrack.
yep.
And I thought, man, that's a cool, that's I don't want to say
He
pop rock,
is.
but it's
I mean, of our generation,
it's
he
a
is an
radio single.
incredible wordsmith. He's just incredible as a lyricist, and how do they shoot themselves in the foot? It's hard. I mean, drink themselves to a stupor, go out, not play a complete song before they go into a cover of, I don't know, a Johnny Cash song that they won't play the full cover of. They're just,
Yeah. That Zeppelin book, by the way, I think Bob Spitz is the one you're referring
that's
to.
the one.
Yeah,
That
Bob
is the one.
Spitz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a lot like that. Those two books are very similar in that they're exhaustive and they had the participation of the people,
Yep.
which I think makes a difference.
Now the book is Leon Russell, The Master of Space and Time's Journey Through
Ah,
Rock and Roll History by Bill Janovitz of the band
yep.
Buffalo Tom. Leon Russell is an icon, but so underappreciated. So says Jovanovitz. And yeah, that's hard to argue. He really is underappreciated when you think about all the stuff he did, not just as a musician, but he had that studio
Hmm.
that he brought a lot of musicians in, Sky Hill.
Yep.
And yeah, I have not read this book, and I remember I wanted to, I tried to get Bill on, and I wasn't able to. But he
I've
worked
tried
with
to.
everybody, like
Yeah.
Sinatra. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I mean, but he had artists working around the clock. There was one story about I was able to read an excerpt, and there was a guy saying it was Thanksgiving Day, and he had no clue because they were just recording 24/7. It was like he didn't even know what day it was,
Oof.
and somebody was like, "Why are you here?" He's like, I'm always here working on music." He's like, "It's Thanksgiving." Oh, I
Oh,
didn't know. Really? I had no idea. And what was the other one? Oh, well, the story behind A Song for You, that on
oh,
Spotify, that's the most played song, and it's thought to be about Rita Coolidge, at least
yes.
partially, because
Yeah.
she worked with him, and then they were also romantically involved. She said it was about her, but Leon said it wasn't, and it's likely about Greg Dempsey, who co-wrote songs with Leon in 1970, or on the 1970 self-titled debut Leon album. This is an excerpt from the book I found. Leon never publicly divulged the inspiration for A Song for You. Don Williams, who had become head of music publishing at Shelter Records that year, theorized that it was Greg Dempsey who was the subject in A Song for You. I honestly believe that it has to do with the songwriting relationship between Leon and Greg, he said.
Oh,
Leon gave credence to this idea when he hinted years later, quote, I wrote that song in 10 minutes. I wrote it for somebody that I had an argument with that I didn't want to have an argument with. I wrote that song so I could sing it for him. The person was very instrumental in teaching me about songwriting and writing in general. And yeah, him is the biggest hint there.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so
Because Rita Coolidge didn't go through a gender transition.
yeah, I mean a lot of times it could be a composite of people too.
Sure.
That could always good. Yeah, Leon's son-in-law, friend, and collaborator Matt Harris said that Leon told him privately that Dempsey was the inspiration.
Okay.
Leon said I was living with my friends. They were a couple, Dempsey and Yessie. That was somebody, and I can't recall. I forget who Yessie is the last name. They were fighting, and I was sleeping on the couch. I was the third wheel. I wrote it to both of them. When I talk about the bridge, you taught me precious secrets of a truth withholding nothing. That's about songwriting. He taught me how to write a song. He taught me how to put it together, to talk about the truth. And to be honest, this was my love letter to them as a couple of how much I love them. It's not about a girl. So yeah, it's like a composite of maybe both.
Oh,
Yeah, Leon, man, what an awesome voice too. And
yeah.
he had that look. He the big the hat.
Mhm.
I think Dr. John was like the first maybe to have that look, and then Leon,
And then the guy from Leonard Skinner.
the bassist,
Yeah.
um, Leon Wilkeson.
That's it. Yeah, Northern Leon.
Yeah, yeah, man, love Skinner.
But yeah,
Another book
and
you,
Jim Gordon played with Russell.
yes, he did. He did. That was yeah, it was like they were crossing paths a lot back in those days. As your dog, he's scratching himself back there.
Rufus.
Haha, Rufus, what's up, man? Look at
He's
that face.
sadly
He's getting up there in age, huh? Is he? Or
he's t- I he's he's gravely ill.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah, so
Rufus, what's up, buddy?
he's got a tumor in his bladder that they can't
Oh,
operate on. So
yeah. Well, he's hanging with you. It looks like he's. Look at that
yeah,
face.
yeah. All right, it's a matter of days at this point.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, try to make
Rufus.
him comfy as possible.
Yeah. What one other book you mentioned? Our Band Could Be Your Life by Michael Azerrad. What is this one about?
That's about all these college bands. You remember college rock when it was
Hmm.
college rock,
Yeah.
REM, Husker Du, Black Flag, Fugazi, The Replacements, how they served as their own, not touring community, in that they were all trying to achieve the same thing. I don't think any of them had any aspirations to be rock stars per se. They just wanted to be self-sustaining musicians. And um, each chapter is a focus on the band and their tour, and it always overlaps. Like the Minutemen would overlap with Black Flag because they're on the West Coast doing the West Coast tours. Um, REM and the Replacements were good friends. They would stay at Peter Buck's place in Athens when they'd go through there. As it's about community, really, and supporting one another. It's a fascinating read uh, if you like those bands.
Yeah, I miss REM. It's kind of bummed when they called it quits, but I think they called it quits for the right reasons. It was time, they
They
felt,
did.
but I think
They
they were
did.
still making great music right up
Really,
until the end.
I lost interest
Did
sometime in
you?
the early aughts. Yeah,
Yeah. They signed the biggest record deal of all time in the 90s.
at that time, yeah, it was
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah, it's huge. A book that makes your list of favorites is the biggest selling rock related book of all time, Daisy Jones and the Six. But it's a fictional story, loosely
Yeah,
based on Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham.
yeah.
Stevie commented on it, actually. She said, quote, "It brought back memories that made me feel like a ghost watching my own story."
Oh well,
Mhm. If you include fictional books on music, it's the best selling of all time. Over 2 million copies sold, which is mind blowing because I remember asking an author once, what's a good number? And they said like 200, 250,000, 500. You're like blown away. 2 million. In
two
fact, if,
million.
if you remove that and just go with nonfiction, Tom Petty's biography by Warren Zanes called Petty,
Yeah.
200,000 plus sold. That's number one. And Warren was on this podcast to talk about his book on Nebraska, Springsteen's Nebraska.
Okay.
What
Oh wow.
an awesome guy, super intelligent, very nice. Yeah, yeah. Petty's book is one.
I
And
didn't read
and
that one.
you know what's quickly become number two? My F in Life, Geddy Lee.
That is a fantastic book.
Hmm. I get
Boy, do
yeah,
I like that one.
yeah. The Heroin Diaries is three.
What's that?
That's Nikki Six.
Uh,
Yeah. I think yeah, yeah. Acid for the Children, a memoir. That's Flea.
eh,
Heavier Than Heaven, the biography of Kurt Cobain. That's
eh.
by Charles R. Cross. Life by
How many of
Keith
those have you had on the
Richards.
show? How many of those writers?
The writers only Warren Zanes. Don't believe. I wish I could say I had Geddy Lee. Geddy, you want to come on?
Come
Um,
on, Ged. What else? Come on.
yeah, kicking and dreaming: the story of heart, soul, and rock and roll by Ian Wilson. Great to
Mm.
see them back together on tour. Iron Man, that's by Tony Iommi. Another recent one is Surrender by Bono. That's
Yeah,
2022. Wow, it's already been 2 years.
yeah. I did you read that?
No, I want to.
I listened to it. I didn't read it, but
Hmm.
here's all I'll say about that. He's Irish. Irish folks are known for weaving a good yarn.
Oh yeah,
There's a particular story in there where he talks about how Mikhail Gorbachev just showed up at his house one Sunday afternoon, and he had forgotten to tell his wife that one of the single most important people of the 20th century is coming over to the house. I didn't buy it for a fucking second. I'm
yeah,
sure there's all sorts of security protocol that went into place. I don't believe like it's like Mikhail's just coming over to have a cup of coffee at lunch, and I forgot to tell the wife, which is how he presents it. And I'm like,
yeah,
come on,
yeah,
there's way more involved. I'm not buying it. That being said, it's a great story.
yeah.
It's fantastic
Uh,
to listen to and
I
read,
love
and
you
it's
too.
just fun.
Yeah, love you too. What was somebody? God, where did I hear it? Somebody was talking about interviewing Gene Simmons, and he kept pointing out the fact that in Gene's book there was some incorrect information. Like he was talking about a band that opened for Kiss in some certain year, and he's like, "That wasn't the band, and it was a different year." And Gene was just starting to get a little pissed. It's like, that's not what the book's about. A kid who grew up from nothing and became something, you know.
You
Because
actually do a pretty good Gene Simmons there.
you're a very handsome and charming man.
No,
But yeah, that a lot of those dudes, man, they don't remember what the hell happened.
no.
Boy, I'm trying to remember who was it that was pressing him on that. Oh my God, I can't remember. But anyway, yeah, tell us about this book, Triptych, Three Studies of Manic Street Preachers. Did I pronounce that right?
You did. Yeah.
The Holy
I,
Bible by Larissa Wadkey,
mhm.
Rhiannon
It-
E. Jones, and Daniel Lucas, I think.
it's all
Apologies.
based on their third album called The Holy Bible.
Oh,
And,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it takes an academic approach, a less academic approach, and a more casual approach
That's cool. That's
to
interesting, man. That's a really
yeah.
cool
It's
concept.
and if you know the album, I just said it to somebody, the guys in Sons of Silver yesterday. I was like, it's the sound of somebody losing their mind. So it's worthy of academic study. And so it's just those three different angles and presentations. It's somewhat akin to if you've ever seen the Neil Brennan stand-up special called Three Mics.
No.
He has three mics up on the stage where one mic is for shticky jokes, like knock knock jokes or just standard setup punchline. Second one are a little bit more elaborate jokes, and the third mic is for more monologue-y type stuff that's more cerebral, you know. And so it's sort of akin to that, in that there are three different approaches to examining this one record. That to me is probably the one of the greatest records of our generation.
Well, I've got to listen to it because I've never listened to it, and I think it's on Spotify.
It is. It should be.
Yeah, I'll check that out. But see, that's part of the one of the many reasons I love doing this podcast is to I don't want to just talk about the bands and artists I know. I want to
Yeah.
learn about more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That
it's
one's really
yeah, it's an endless search too, which I love. It's like, okay, fine. Give me like there are bands that came and went during a time when I could have certainly been aware of them and really invested time in them that I didn't. And then years later I do.
yeah.
Yeah. A few more
Um,
books. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
I was just gonna no, go ahead.
You have a few more books on your list. Tim Summers' The Hootie the Blowfish book,
Yeah.
and Making Rumours, the inside story of the classic Fleetwood Mac album by Ken Calais, the co-producer of the album. The
Yeah.
promo for the book lists some of the stories, including a shouting match between Stevie and Lindsey during You Make Loving Fun. Do you remember the story?
I don't remember the story, no.
We can imagine it, though. We're not surprised.
I do remember I seem to recall them. We all know the salacious stories, but the making of the record was far more arduous than I think we can even imagine. But they still did it and made one of the greatest pieces of recorded music, I think. But but it what he does is he takes it from an engineer's approach. So there's some technical stuff about what kind of board they were working on and all that sort of stuff. That kind of lost me. But yeah, it's just when you think you've heard everything or read everything that there is to know about the book or about the making of that record and the band, along comes this book. So
he
that was good.
he
And the
did
Tim
another
Summer.
one on Tusk.
He did?
He did him and Aaron Rojas, who was one of the I believe one of the engineers for Rumours as well in Tusk. So
Oh
that's another
wow.
great book. I had both of them on way back in the early days of the podcast.
Really?
Yes, great stories. And Hernan Rojas, when we were chatting off air, he was saying that he was one of the people at a studio in I want to say New York or L.A. Maybe L.A. That when Gene Simmons produced the Van Halen demos, uh, Hernan was there, like a young assistant engineer or whatever. And I remember he said to me, but yeah, he goes, I remember seeing Eddie Van Halen, an 18-year-old Eddie walking down the hall with a guitar in his hand, looking just a kid. I was like, get out. And
Wow.
I said, if you ever want to talk about that some more, let me know. He's like, oh yeah, but we never followed up. But I think it would have been because Gene was working on those songs that in both LA and New York. I think
Have those songs ever seen the light of day?
not officially, but they're online.
Oh, they are.
Yeah, and you could tell they sound like a little more of like a Kiss lean to them. They're a little more polished, whereas Templeman was able to get the band, the essence of the band live
Yeah.
on tape. Yeah. I'm trying to remember the Van Halen demos. There was in New York, I want to say it was Electric Ladyland.
That
Two
sounds
places.
right.
Yeah, it was in two different places. But when he's just describing just a little kid, like Eddie, like, okay, like just shy and like, what are we doing? Where do you need me to record? Yeah, gotta remember the two. New York City. They were demoed in New York. Yeah, the Van Halen demos. Yeah, was it Electric Ladyland?
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Aaron was there. Uh, yeah. What else do we have here? A few books
The
that
Tim
came to
Somer book.
mind. Oh, the yeah. Do you want to talk about that? The Hootie
I
book. That's a
do.
that's a
I
newer
absolutely do.
book, right? Within the last few years.
The what?
That's within the last few years that came out.
It has, yeah. The
Yeah.
last, his story is fascinating, and it's tragic across the board. We all know Hootie and the Blowfish, bajillion million selling recording artist,
Broke the
deservedly
record
so.
of Boston's debut
Yeah,
albums copy sold.
it's just, and it's a great record. But Tim's path is interesting. And Tim, if you ever hear this, I apologize in advance for telling your story. But he he was an A&R guy for Atlantic Records. Went out to Seattle. Seattle was just bubbling, just beginning to bubble. And I'm not even sure if Nirvana and Pearl Jam. I think Mother Love Bone had been signed. So it was just beginning. So he went out there and he ran across a band called the Gits, Gits, the Gits, and fell in love with them. Thought they were great. Wanted to sign them. I'm going to speed the story up just a scoosh. Wanted to sign them. They agreed to sign. He went out to sign them, and I think it was the night before, the lead singer Mia Zapata had been murdered, raped and murdered.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's a big Seattle thing. They still, in fact, the guy who raped and murdered her was just caught and convicted in the past 5 years. I want to say 5 or 10 years. But that was a lot of Seattle bands after Seattle rose to prominence would still support the cause of finding the killer. So he lost it. He couldn't sign him. The lead singer's dead. Came back to New York all dejected. Somebody casually just sort of handed him this envelope with Hootie and the Blowfish in their demo. And he's like, I don't want to hear this. I don't want to listen to this right now. He's sad. He's sad because somebody he knew got murdered, and put it in, fell in love with it, and signed them. But he met so much resistance with Atlantic Records. He took it to his boss after the album, after they had finished Cracked Rear View. He took it to his boss, and his boss said, "It's unreleasable. We can't release this."
It's unreleasable.
Yeah, that's exactly.
I'm
Yes,
sorry. I don't mean to laugh at the person who said that, but
he's a. If you read it, if you
fucking sold like 15 million copies.
so Tim was so convinced that this was a good album. He went above him. He had a relationship with the boss above him, so he went to him and said, "Listen," he said, "we can't release this, but I think we should release this." And I forget who it was. I'd say it was the head of Atlantic. He goes, "Tim, if you think it's worth releasing, then we'll release it."
Oh, how about that?
Met the same kind of resistance, and at the time, Atlantic was struggling. Cracked comes out, sells a bajillion copies, keeps the lights on at Atlantic Records. when they go to record the follow-up, he meets with not the same resistance, but still resistance. And he doesn't say it, but you can't help but wonder if there isn't just some kind of racial aspect
Mm,
to it, you know? But
yeah,
it's a great story how he got his career, how he got that side of his career and found his success. Tragic. It's it makes for a great read if you like Hootie. I like Hootie and the
I
Blowfish.
do. I do. And I'm going to tell you, Fairweather Johnson, I love Tuckerstown
Yeah.
and I love Old Man and Me.
Oh,
They're
that's such a
both
great
great
song.
tunes.
Oh,
And, in cracked rear view, there's no arguing it. It took me a while to warm up to it.
same,
I think Hold My Hand was the first single. So I was like,
same.
but Only Want to Be With You was, I think, when I was like, yeah, yeah. And then Time, I love Drowning. So I
Oh,
said, okay, let me get the whole thing. I got the CD. And, what an interesting story of it, like a whole second life for Darius Rucker, right?
yeah,
Country star.
right.
Yeah, and I think Hootie, I think he goes back and forth between the two because I remember Hootie coming around our way here in Connecticut and played at Toad's Place in New Haven, just a small club.
Yeah. They do. I think they're gearing up for a tour. I think it's in 2024.
Okay, yeah, well, well, that makes sense because Cracked Rear View was released in July of '94, so that would be an anniversary.
I think I
Yeah,
seem to recall reading that. I bet if you did a quick search on Hootie and the Blowfish
yeah.
tour, you'd find
Did you
they.
hear Post Malone's? He re-recorded "Only Want to Be with You," and
No.
instead of "The Dolphins Make Me Cry," "Cowboys Make Me Cry" because he's a Dallas Cowboys fan.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a big Post Malone fan.
I don't
Yeah.
think I know.
Yeah, interesting. Let's see, what are they touring? Let's see what they got for, yeah, in 2019 to present, new music and tour. I don't see anything current.
Oh,
Could be wrong. This is Wikipedia. So, um, yeah, a few books that came to mind when I asked you which ones you want to read but haven't yet. Altamont by Joel Selvin.
yeah.
I have to read that one. And
That's it.
Euphoric Recall by Peter
Just
Jesperson.
yep.
And then
He's the
books you
replacements guy.
Okay.
Yep.
And then books you'd like to see written that haven't been yet. You say a book on Soul Asylum. Tell me about these guys, man. You're a huge fan.
I
This
am.
they're kind of remind me, like, I think this might be your version. Like, that's my Blues Traveler is my,
Okay.
like, I love Blues Traveler, and Soul Asylum. You talk about a band that was uh,
They
Dave Perner
are.
was on the cover of Rolling Stone at one point.
He was, and he still writes great songs. I mean, he really does.
Is Soul
They
Asylum
have a work
still
ethic.
active or is he solo?
The Soul Asylum is still active. However, it's he is the only member. Um, they have a work ethic that is unparalleled as far as I'm concerned. I bet if I sent, I'm being facetious, but I bet if I sent Dave Perner an email and said, "Hey, you want to come play an acoustic show in my apartment?" He'd be like, "Okay, yeah, sure." You know, I say that facetiously. I don't think he ever would, but they just work. That's what he does.
And
It's
they took
not.
a long time to get to that point where they were
Uh-huh.
really big. They formed in the early 80s,
Well, they came up with the replacements. They,
1981.
they came up and they were part of that whole group. In fact, Dave Perner went to high school with Tommy Stinson, who's the bass player for the replacements, before Tommy dropped out. But that's something else altogether.
Yeah, he was in
But
his 30s by the time they finally made it big.
yeah, and it
Born
was
in
the last.
64.
They had just gotten dropped by A&M. Columbia took him just as a wing and a prayer. They're like, all right, we'll sign you for one album, and that happened to be Grave Dancers Union.
Black
But
Gold,
I just
Runaway
think they're a
Train.
great band. They work really hard. They Dave Perner writes good songs, and here's my thing with Dave Perner. When your contemporaries are Bob Mould, um, Bob Mould, well, I'm
Oh, I
drawing it.
think you wrote it in the
I
email to
did.
me. Let me see if I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
it here.
Prince, Bob Mould.
Oh yeah, Prince, Bob Mould, and Paul Westerberg are your contemporaries. It's
Yeah,
hard to rise above that.
that's hard. That's hard to get noticed. And lording over everyone is Bob Dylan, who's from Minnesota as well. So it's tough, but he still managed to rise up. I don't know. I think Soulless Island is a wickedly, wickedly underrated and overlooked band.
And before Grave Dancers Union, there were 5 studio albums.
A few on Twin Tone and I think 3 on A&M.
A&M.
Yep.
A&M is Blues Traveler too.
Were they?
Yeah, yeah. A&M. Yeah. Good stuff, man. Another book you'd like to see written is a deep dive into why some bands don't break in America, like the Tragically Hip from Canada, Manic Street Preachers, who are from the UK. You ask, is it marketing, radio, our taste? Probably a combination of all three. That'd be a good book. Authors out there, here's your book idea.
The Tragically Hip, why were they not big here?
Yeah.
There's those first 3 records, not a bad song on them, and they're straight up blues-based rock and roll. Can't go wrong.
Yes, and their frontman, I think, is no longer with us. Right? He's no longer with us.
No, he passed. Yeah,
and I remember hearing when that happened, they were talking about like how much of a genius this guy was, and it's like, well, why don't I know more about him?
Because we don't live in a state that borders Canada.
Right. Tragically. So yeah, so websites, social media. What do you want to get out there? Where can people find you?
The Abandoned Albums podcast is available on all platforms. You can find Abandoned Albums on Instagram at abandoned_albums. We're on the Facebook at Abandoned Albums. Twitter, don't do. Me personally, you don't need. I mean, it's easy enough. If you know me, you know how to get a hold of me. But yeah, the podcast works in 12 episode seasons. So we'll do 12, take a couple weeks off, come back with another 12. And I also have the Mix and Match podcast, which is for everybody, and candidly, Eric, I think I'm going to have to not do the songs anymore. I keep getting stuck in YouTube jail.
We talked about that. I know, man. It sucks.
And it's always universal.
Yeah, it sucks. And sometimes the audio only ones, I used to get those pulled down too. The Beatles episodes got pulled down a lot. Yeah, it's YouTube, man. They don't play around with that stuff, especially if you monetize it now. I've monetized my YouTube channel, so I don't mess around with that because
I don't think I have.
Yeah. Got to Get Back in Time is the most recent episode, so check that out. Yep. Wait for Me, Springsteen on Love. The Boss Gives Love Advice, 100 words.
That's one of my 100 words.
Yep. Yeah, so check out the website.
Yeah, the website. The website is abandonedalbums.com, and we also have a Substack, which you should sign up for. It's substack.abandonedalbums.
Right, because I think I'm looking at the Substack one.
Oh, the Abandoned Albums website is just the podcast.
Yeah, I got you. Yep, looking at it here. Yeah, and a cool logo. You sent me a shirt, and a sticker and a business card, and I love it. I hope you use the magnet. I think I threw a magnet. Yeah, the magnet too. I got it up on the old Frigidaire. It's up there.
Yeah, the only criteria I gave the graphic designer was like, I like skulls. Literally, that's all I said.
Yeah.
And that's what she came up with.
Yeah, it's really cool. I love it. So thanks so much, man, for being on. This was cool. Thanks for having me on your podcast. And yeah, we will be in touch again down the road, and we'll chat. Sure. We'll chat some more books. Maybe even focus on a specific book or whatever. We'll just talk rock.
We should have a little music book club, Eric.
Hell yes.
We can do a little of these have a few more people.
Well, we talked about this idea, taking the ESPN.
We did. I
first
totally
take
dropped the ball on that.
Debates. You get a mediator, kind of neutral guy. That probably would be me, because I'm the classic Gemini where I can't take one side. I'm always looking at both sides. And then you have these two opinionated dudes, and they just go at it. Like a Stephen A. Smith, and then you have somebody else like a Shannon Sharp talking music, right?
That's a great
idea.
Come
on, man. Let's do it.
Eric, thank you. This was great fun.